Hi there, I'm Karen Dunn of KMD Productions. From the equipment manufacturers to the engineers to the business people behind the scenes. Over the years, every member of the Pro Audio corner of the music industry have become family to me, and it's my job to bring the whole eclectic crew together. Each episode, I'll introduce you to one of these characters and open a window into my world of creating community in pro audio. Thanks for tuning in to One and Dunn. Today we're welcoming Hill Kourkoutis. She's a producer, songwriter, composer, mixer, multi-instrumentalist, engineer, artist, and director. Hi, Hill. Thanks for coming today.
Hey, Karen.
You are my first Canadian I think I've interviewed on my podcast, so that's kind of exciting for me.
That's really fun.
First, I want to congratulate you on your Juno win. How does it feel to be the first woman in Juno history to win a Recording Engineer Award?
It's a profound honor because the Junos up here are like our version of the Grammys. So right. Yeah, it's it's something you dream of as a kid that one day you'll get a Juno. But also I'm really excited about the conversations that are starting around the community of women producers here, because there's definitely a pretty amazing community of work being done here. Yeah, and I just hope I'm not the last now, and that's the next step.
You're right. Yeah, you want to be the first, but you want more to come after you. Did you go in expecting to win?
Not at all. I was, my fellow nominees are some incredible engineers that worked on some pretty epic records in the last year. So, you know that there's a 1 in 5 chance, but
right.
Yeah, I was very shocked when it happened, to be honest.
But it's an honor to be nominated either way, right?
Absolutely.
But it's better to win.
It already felt like the win, to be honest. But yeah, this was a bonus for sure.
So I don't know you very well. We actually only met last week on a Zoom call. So can you tell me a little bit about your background? How did you get into music in the first place? Was your family involved, or was it just something you went off on your own? How did that start?
Well, nobody in my family is an officially trained musician or played any instrument. So I think it was the earliest thing I could remember wanting to do. I come from a Greek family, and we would always go to these cultural dances and stuff. And there was always a live band playing. And I just remember wanting to be up on stage with the band. And one of these occasions, I actually just walked up and grabbed a tambourine and just started playing. Yeah, and I think from then it was a thing. I knew I wanted to start playing guitar, so I eventually started playing guitar after a friend of ours who was in a Greek wedding band gave me his old guitar. And from there, yeah, just kind of really started to pick up steam from there.
How many instruments do you play, and what do you play?
Well, officially I play guitar, bass, drums, and keys, and I sing. And I guess but I'll pick up anything that's there and just kind of figure it out by ear. I did some sax in high school, but I would definitely not say that I'm like a prolific sax player. But yeah, it's pretty much whatever is around, I'll kind of pick up and lay down.
And are you all self-taught in all these different instruments?
For guitar and piano, I was trained, and I did a bit of the classical repertoire with the Royal Conservatory here. I learned theory and all that stuff, and I did classical voice lessons too, but I did not end up going that route. I preferred very much the creative side of things, and everything else I was self-taught on, and just kind of picked it up and figured it out. Like with drums, I loved Nirvana, so I would just try to drum along to Nirvana tunes and taught myself how to play.
That's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
Was your family supportive of your path?
They were. I think they ultimately were really excited about me being a doctor eventually. But I think once they saw that I was really serious about this, they understood. And I was very lucky. Like, I started playing the clubs in Toronto when I was around 13 years old, and my mom drove me to every single gig, I think, until I was 20. So, yeah, she was very supportive. And yeah, my dad's been amazing too.
So how did you go from being a musician and a singer to you did film stuff for a while, right? You went into film?
Yeah, I went to film school because I promised my parents I would get a degree in something. It wasn't medicine, but I did get my Bachelor of Fine Arts in filmmaking. Yeah, and then while I was in film school, I was working for a production company as a executive assistant, and my friend had asked me to direct her music video, and she was signed to EMI at the time. And the executive producer at the company was like, well, if you're going to do this, then we have to produce the video. And then from there, after that video, they ended up signing me on as a director. And so, yeah, throughout film school, I was also directing music videos as well.
Wow. Well, how did you choose? I mean, there's so many things that you do, and there's an overlap on a lot of it, right? But how did you ultimately choose what direction you wanted to go into?
I think I always knew I wanted to be doing creative things. And, for me, film and music are kind of symbiotic to each other. Like I'm a very visual learner, and I kind of picture a lot of things in my mind when I'm playing music. There's always a scene playing out. So getting into music videos, just out of my obviously passion for music, it felt like the perfect marriage there. But yeah, I think my path has been very interesting in that I think the one thing I did plan on was I knew I wanted to be a musician and when I was younger, and I knew I wanted to make that my living, but I don't think I realized what exactly I wanted to do until I started to have all these opportunities come my way. And I think just out of the spirit of wanting to experience everything, I just said yes to everything that would come my way, even if it wasn't the thing that I expected. Like I never expected to get hired to tour with other artists. I was always doing my own project. But once that happened, I realized, oh, this is something I definitely want to experience. And I got to experience amazing things. I got to play late night TV shows in the States,
nice.
The ones that I watched as a kid. And, I got to play these epic venues like Red Rocks that I always dreamed about as a kid. So yeah, I mean, that those experiences, I think definitely also refined eventually what I wanted to do, because I knew that after experiencing all of those things, I did want to settle on focusing on the creative, which is how I kind of ended up focusing on the production and writing combo.
So it was like a funnel process, everything, and then goes down to what you like.
For sure.
I think it's a scary thing when people offer you opportunities that maybe you don't really know how to do what they're asking you to do, or it's such a change from something you're comfortable in. Change is always really hard. How did you stay open to take these chances? Because any of them could have failed. And instead, though, you were able to take these opportunities and turn them into something that has helped you along your whole career path.
For sure. And I mean, to be completely transparent, I was terrified and mortified going into all these things. I have a lot of anxiety around change. But I think the motivating factor for me was that failure is even more terrifying than trying something new. So I just had to find a way to not fail. And that's always been the thing, is just do your best not to fail and find a way to learn out of it and make it work,
Right. So I'm sure that you've had failures along the way, because everybody fails occasionally. And I remember a friend of mine told me the best thing one time when I failed. He said, if you don't fail, you don't learn. And it's so true. The thing I failed at, I completely changed what I was doing and hadn't had that problem since then. But if I hadn't failed then, I would have continued on this path that wasn't right. So what's been your biggest failure, and how did you overcome it and turn it into a positive?
I don't know if there's been one defining failure. I feel like everything is always like me not knowing something, and just the trial and error process of having to figure it out. And I think I've always been open to mistakes. Like I've never looked at mistakes as, I'm very hard on myself when I do make a mistake, but I also understand that it is part of a process when you don't know something. And everything, I feel like even now, even though I've produced dozens and dozens of records, like it's always a new experience. It's always something that I'm terrified of doing, and I'm always terrified I'm going to screw something up. But I think the beauty of being in the creative profession is that there aren't a lot of right answers along a lot of the time. Like there is the client, and obviously everything that I do is in service of the artist that I'm working with.
Right.
But there's a lot of communication and back and forth, I think, until we find out what that is. And I've kind of built that into the process now. Like I know not everything is going to work. And so I've learned to be really open to just the process and not trying to dictate what it's going to be.
Now, I didn't realize really until I started doing these podcasts how important it is to, well, I knew communication was always important, but how important it is to be able to work with an artist, because you're going to have all kinds of artists, right? Some are going to be easy, you'll jive right away, and some will be demanding, and it's going to be a harder thing. So you need to have these skills, people skills, right? You can't just go in, you can't just like graduate from school, get your first job and know exactly what you should be doing. I would think that would be just really a definitely learning experience and something that you need to have more experience doing before you get good at it.
For sure.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think part of what kind of shaped my approach to working with artists is that I came from that artist background as well. So I think from a very young age and very early experiences in the studio, I started to figure out kind of what made me comfortable in the studio versus the experience that made me uncomfortable. And I realized that the most important fundamental thing to an artist's experience in the studio is that they feel heard and that they feel nurtured at the end of the day. And so I think that that's been a huge, and the only way to really reach that place is to have trust and respect, right? As a foundation within the experience, within the relationship, sorry. So yeah, I think now that definitely is my approach going into any project. I like to have a quote unquote dating period with the artist where we actually build a relationship, because once you're in the studio, it's such a vulnerable, intimate space. And I find that you can't just like demand that of somebody. There needs to be that comfort in order to take those risks and play around and figure out what's working and what's not. So I really like to take the time to learn about the artist's experiences, past experiences, what they look for in their future experience and for the experience of making that song or album. I want to know what their motivating factors are as humans, as artists, and then even their business motivations, because then it's my job to kind of facilitate all those things and factor them in and then find a way to achieve all those goals. But for me, there's always that goal. I mean, we're humans in this experience. And I think first and foremost, even for me, every album and project that I take on is a massive learning experience for me as a human. And I do want to see that growth and that as a part of the process, make that a part of the artist process as well. So we have to understand each other's people first and foremost, and what our motivating factors are and what our goals are. And then the professional things just kind of fuse within there.
So with the pandemic, did that change your approach to, because I know at least in the US, a lot of studios were closed for a while, and people were doing things at home.
Same here, yeah. So
how did your approach change when you couldn't be in the studio together? It's, for me, it's easier. This was great that we had a Zoom meeting, so I got to know you a little bit. But for me, it's all about being in a room with someone, because the vibes, immediately you can tell a lot about a person. So it makes it easier to be able to read them and to be able to get along with them. How did you do that virtually?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, that's the vibe is very important to me too. And I kind of had to find a way to translate that in a virtual remote setting, which ended up working out. I actually forged some beautiful friendships. And one of the artists that was actually her song that I was nominated for the Juno for, I hadn't actually met her until last week, like right before the Junos.
Wow.
We had ended up making an entire album remotely together. I had to coach her on how to get a home recording setup done so we could like record her vocals. But I think what was really interesting about that is that it spoke to our resilience as like creatives and artists and just having to find a way to make that work and translate, but also spoke to this human experience of realizing we rely so heavily on a vibe in a room, and it really forced us to learn how to communicate very truly and openly. And so I think because we knew we would have to create that trust, we just dove into these really deep conversations, to try to accelerate that experience of learning about each other and knowing each other. So it was a mix of phone calls and FaceTimes and, we'd call each other while we're like eating dinner and would just chat and hang out and learn about each other's lives and talk about the music and just really keeping that open line of communication all the time, be outside of the studio, quote unquote. So it was more challenging for sure, but it was also really awesome to know that it's still possible to do these things and make profound connections, despite the fact that we couldn't convene together.
Right. I do love that song that was nominated. I think it's so pretty. Was there one moment or one project that shifted you from the big picture down to your songwriter, producer, engineer?
I think it was touring my ass off that did that to me. I loved touring. I loved playing on stage and connecting with people. And I was always very fortunate to be on the road with friends of mine. So it was always a really fun experience. But I think after you do something for years and years on end, and you're just kind of playing the same show every night. And for me, that's when I started to realize that although I love this and I love the people that I'm with, my true love and the reason why I got into music was because of the creative process. So after I kind of got the touring thing out of my system and I realized that it was time to do something new, well, it wasn't new because I was always producing along the way and I was always writing along the way. But I that was the kind of moment where I decided, okay, I think I need to take that leap and just put all my focus into 100% what I want to do.
Have you been able to take any of your film skills that you learned and translate them into recording and producing?
I think in some ways the filmmaking side is a part of the process. Like in that time where we're getting to know each other, I always ask the artists to riff with me on what their visual concepts for their project are. A lot of the time artists already have ideas of the mood of the photos that they want to take, or the music videos that they want to do. A lot of the time while we're recording, we actually come up with video concepts together, which I find a lot of fun because I do miss making music videos. So that's a fun part of it for me. But even just having some visual references, whether they're photos or films, to have kind of on tap or study before we go into making the album, because I feel like that establishes a mood. And it just kind of allows us to reach that emotional place a lot quicker. For me anyway, I find that the visuals are always like, the visual paired with the audio is a very powerful combo.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Have you worked in any of the studios in the US or are you primarily Canada based?
Most of the projects I've worked on are in Canada. But yeah, I've worked out of a bunch of studios in LA, like friend spots whenever I've traveled, and I try to visit studios in whatever city I'm in, just because I love visiting places. I love looking at the gear. I love meeting new people. Yeah.
So what would you say are the main differences between the studios in Canada and the studios in the US that you've seen so far?
I mean, I think every studio is unique. They're all the same in that there's usually always a console and there's a bunch of great outboard gear. But the things that usually draw me to a studio space is, the people working there. And then the rooms, like I don't kind of commit to single studios. I really love getting a feel for the place and a feel for the rooms, and then the combo of the gear that would kind of influence what we're trying to do specifically for a project. Like even in Toronto, I work out of a bunch of studios and I usually choose them depending on whether we need an album with a huge room, right? So that we need that ceiling and those walls. Versus some smaller studios that just kind of give you that more intimate, dry space. But I think the studios, for the most part, like there is a consistency in that they all contain amazing gear and awesome people. And the thing and it's not necessarily a Canada versus US thing. I just noticed from studio to studio, each one will have its own unique set of things that kind of make it appealing, right? Yeah.
Do you have a favorite studio in the US that you've worked at?
I mean, I've been by Electric Lady. That's obviously epic. And I can't remember the name of the studio, but I was working out of this studio in North Hollywood. I did a writing session and I just loved the vibe in there. And now I'm kicking myself because I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, it's...
What's your favorite studio in Canada?
I mean, there's so many great spaces in Toronto. One of my favorites are Canterbury studios, and I love doing live off the. I don't always get the privilege of recording live off the floor because a lot of records now are multi-tracked, but
Right.
it's got such a great vibe in there, and they have this old vintage Neve console. I think it's like one of three that exists in the world.
Oh, wow.
And it's really beautiful to record through. Yeah, and then Julian and Jeremy, the engineers there, are just sweethearts, and we have a really great dynamic together. And they have a bunch
Nice.
of great vintage gear in there too. So yeah, that's one of my favorites, I'd say. And then another one, it's on the smaller side. It's called Lincoln County Social Club, and it belongs to my friend John Dinsmore. And it's essentially a space in his house, like he lives above, and then the studio is 2 floors. And I go there a
Nice.
lot for drum tracking because a lot of the time I primarily do most of the records in my space, but I love his room for drums because he has really tall ceilings.
Yeah, nice. So, and you have the Lair. So, how long have you had your space?
My space, I've had pretty much an incarnation of it has existed since I started recording in my bedroom. So I started making records in my bedroom and called it the Lair. And that was because my sister always said that I disappear, like, and I'm like all creepy like a mad scientist in the Lair, just like working at all hours. So that's why I named it that. And it kind of stuck. And yeah, I had a space in Toronto for a good 10 years. And then during the pandemic, I actually moved north of the city, and I just pretty much set up a room in my house that's dedicated to like the main space. But now I have a whole house to record in, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, that's very cool. So goal setting for me is really important, and it's not even competition against other people. I'm horribly competitive with myself, and I always have to have goals. Yeah, and I'm always goal setting. So we talked earlier about how winning a Juno had always been one of your goals. So you won that. That's like the biggest thing you can win, right? So how do you go about, did you set new goals, and what kind of goals do you have now that you're striving towards?
A lot of my goals are oriented around just ensuring that I'm choosing to work on projects that fuel me not only creatively but as a person. Like that human experience element is very important. I constantly want to challenge myself, and just ensuring that you're working with great people. I think that's always a goal of mine, is finding those amazing artists to work with, and just those people that I feel I could be the best facilitator for. Because I mean, choosing a producer for an artist is like, I don't know. It's a very intimate thing, and there could be so many different producers for you depending on what it is that you want to achieve. Right. So finding that match is always a goal of mine. But I think for me, I just want to challenge myself by working on different types of projects that I haven't done before. Like I've never made a jazz record, and I think like I definitely want to make a jazz record soon because I love jazz music. And I mean, obviously, I don't know, one day it'd be really awesome to win a Grammy because that's something that I dreamed of as a kid. But that's not the motivating goal for me. Like that type of stuff, obviously, they're very validating moments, and they're lovely, and they're an honor. But
it's like extra,
for me, it's mainly, it's extra, exactly. Like for me, the main focus is about the creativity, and am I being honest in my creativity, and am I being honest within my dynamic with the artists I'm working with, and that to me is the most important thing.
Now, how do artists find you, or do you find them? How does that work?
It's mostly artists coming to me, I guess, based on other work that I've done. But every so often, it will happen that I'll just meet an artist and we will hit it off, and then that will organically lead to us somehow working together. A lot of the time it starts by us writing a song together, and that for me is one of the greatest ways of telling how we work together creatively in the studio. And so that is a part of the relationship building sometimes, where eventually once we work together and we realize we love working with each other, that'll lead into, the larger scale project of making the album together.
And it sounds like you consciously strive to get all different kinds of artists. You don't want just one sound. You want to delve into all different areas of music. Is that true?
Yes, but I don't think it's as conscious as that. I think for me, I just fall in love with an artist, and then that will be that artist could be in any genre, because for me, it's about the artist and the song at the end of the day. And if I love the artist and I love the songs, and that's kind of what draws me to a project. And then music is something we all just feel, right? So I think as a fan of many genres of music, you know, it's not rocket science in that. It's a very intuitive thing that I think just naturally, once you start to listen to the songs and you start to hear what the artist wants, all of those kind of creative choices within a genre or within the palette that we're trying to create, or all of those technical choices that we make to achieve those things, I think become just very innate. Mm-hmm. At least that's how I like to be because I find that when I get in my head about things, that's when things don't sound right. So I really try to not overthink things and just go with my initial intuition about things.
Now, have you ever had a issue where the artist wants you to do something a certain way and you think it's all wrong, but do you go with it? Do you try to communicate why maybe her approach is going to won't work as well? Or how do you deal with something like that?
I think the experience is the most important part. So I will always try things, even if I don't think intuitively that's where it needs to end up. And a lot of the time I'm wrong, and I'm open to being wrong too, because I also don't think that I am the be all end all of knowing the right answers when it comes to making a record. Like it's a journey. So I'm always open to trying things, and sometimes I'm right in my intuition and sometimes I'm pleasantly surprised, you know? And so I think it's really open, especially if the artist has a vision. And I think a big part of my approach too is empowering artists, because I think majority of artists know what they want, and they don't necessarily have the vocabulary to articulate that, but that doesn't mean that they don't know what they want. And I think once you're able to find what that vocabulary is between each other, and you kind of give them that knowledge, you give them those keywords to be able to articulate themselves, you discover that they actually do know what they want. So I trust the artist. Like I need to trust the artist as much as they need to trust me, I think, in order to make the whole experience work.
Right. So I know some artists see music as colors. Some see it as notes. They can see that it's in their head. They know exactly what they want. There's so many different ways that artists can hear their music. So how do you deal with all of those how do you make it all come out so it's something that me as a consumer will understand and feel?
I make them do homework. This sounds so crazy, but I actually came up with a few really effective exercises that help in that establishing the foundation of the approach that we're going to take. And I think for me, because a lot of the time I'm actually the musician that's also playing everything on most of the stuff that I'm producing, I want to get an idea of what they naturally gravitate towards sonically. So we do this playlist exercise where I get them to make a playlist of all these songs, and then we'll sit down together and listen to it, and I'll ask them exactly what it is about those songs that they like. And sometimes they choose a song because they like the overall aesthetic. Sometimes it's, I like the way the vocals sound. I don't know why, but this is why. Or sometimes it's, I like this keyboard sound. So I'm able to narrow down the thousands of keyboards that I could potentially use into something that eventually becomes the master palette that we work from. And it's really just, it's awesome in those conversations too, because while we're getting these things pointed out, I can actually say, oh, this is what's happening to the vocal and this is why you like it.
Interesting.
And so it's also just a bit of a lesson for them too, and becoming consciously aware of what it is that they like, so that whether we work together or not down the road, they also have that vocabulary to proceed and articulate themselves. So that's a pretty big one for me. And I think that also limits the scope of guesswork, which I don't want to be guessing off the top. I want to be able to limit it a bit so that they don't get terrified the first time they hear something to me. Like, that's not what I wanted at all, you know? There's a baseline at least to work from.
That's pretty funny. You were talking earlier about that community of women producers, and that it's a pretty awesome community. And one of the things I talk a lot about is community. I love the pro audio community. My favorite people are in this community. So, what does community mean to you? What's your definition of it?
My definition of community is friendship. It's about amplifying and supporting. It's about empowering each other. Um, yeah, and you're right. It is such a small community, and everyone knows each other. And
Yeah.
I've always been very lucky to be a part of a community where I've had people that believed in me and supported me and championed me, and I owe where I am now to that community. Um, and women getting into this profession, it's not new. I mean, we've existed, but I think what's happening now, and I think this is also because technology and the pandemic, a mix of that, has kind of allowed a perfect storm of people that might have been weary of entering this profession to take that leap because they have the time. And I'm also noticing a lot of artists who really, as I mentioned earlier, I think artists totally know what they want to sound like, and they
Uh,
just never had the confidence necessarily or the time to kind of go down that technical rabbit hole.
mhm.
So I've seen like a surge of women becoming producers in the last couple of years, which is awesome. And um, I think we've all been making a conscious effort to find each other and to speak about our experiences, which has been very empowering. I'm even finding myself like discovering way more people I didn't even realize were doing this,
Uh,
and just making new friends and talking about our experiences. And it's been really awesome.
it's a cool thing. Women helping women. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, so, do you mentor? Are you big on mentoring? I know a lot of the women in the industry right now and that's right, they're all giving back because, they see there's women and a lot of times, women before they come in these fields, they don't even know that they exist, that there's a possibility that they could be a producer or any of this. So, how do you give back and help out that way?
For sure. Mentorship is huge for me. I wouldn't be where I am again without that community and those mentors that were part of that community. So I do believe in paying that forward. And I do a lot of panels at festivals. There's also a lot of organizations in Canada that are focused towards, closing the gender gap in the production field.
Uh-huh.
So I do a lot of mentoring through organizations like SOCAN and Music Publishers Canada and the Songwriters Association of Canada. I've done a bunch of like online lecture series. We just did one in the last couple of years during the pandemic for songwriters because a lot of songwriters were interested in getting studio setups
Uh-huh.
in their homes during the pandemic so that they can continue working. So I kind of did this production 101 thing that had about 8 modules, and I was able to teach people how to start recording, which is pretty fun.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, and anytime I'm really open to young folks reaching out to me too, or not young folks, or artists that are just getting into this now that have been doing this for a really
Right.
long time. Anytime they have questions, like anytime I can help someone figure something out or give them some advice. It's obviously anecdotal advice because I could only speak based on what my
Sure.
experience has
Yeah.
been.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always happy to help. That's a part of the community building aspect that we were talking about. It's
Right.
actually being active within your community and helping each other out,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I'm a big believer in that.
There's a organization called She Knows Tech,
Hmm.
and I found out about them. I did a speed mentoring session with Berklee College of Music in Valencia, and one of the participants had created this group, and they had a summit last summer, and they did one of the speed mentoring, and I'd always done a mixed, different people in the industry. So we do 20 people, 20 students from a school, and it was always mixed age, just different types of people. Well, this one was, I think we had about 50 people, but it was all women. And it was so
Hmm.
interesting because they go to their breakout rooms and they come back and we do a group question. And the questions that the women asked were just so different than the ones that I had heard in a mixed group. So
Hmm.
I think it was really empowering for everybody, the mentors and the mentees, just to have this large group of women. They all want the same thing. So how do you get there? And let me ask, can I have a kid and still have a career? It was stuff like that the mentors were able to ask that in a mixed situation, a lot of these women would not have been comfortable asking. So
100%,
that worked out
because I
really
think
well.
yeah, we're balancing two sides of society. And it's funny you mentioned that. I'm part of this group with the National Arts Center in Canada, and we've created this community of producers from all around the world. And we have these monthly meetings where we just get together and we talk. And sometimes we have questions for each other. Sometimes we have these information sharing sessions where we talk about specific things that people are interested in learning. And it's a group of people that are kind of at various levels of their career. So it's really awesome to just have those monthly spaces, right, where we can get together. And we do kind of do this breakout room thing too, where we go and speak to each other. And yeah, I look forward to those sessions because I get to know what's happening in communities even beyond the scene in Canada or the US. Because we're talking to producers that are in Australia and Estonia and
oh, that's great,
Argentina. Yeah, and each of those scenes are just doing their own thing and they're thriving. It's amazing.
Yeah. So what's been your biggest professional challenge so far, whether it's engineering, producing, or running your studio?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that there's a constant challenge for me. It's always this inner challenge, and it's trying to reconcile my mind versus my heart. You know, I always find that I'm very. I think it's the toughest thing, right? Is not getting too into your head because I'm extremely self-critical. I always have this crazy anxious dialogue running in my head that's trying to get ahead of problems.
Totally
and
understand.
I think the biggest thing, and the biggest thing for me is trying to learn how to be more present, right? And not get too far down the rabbit hole of like, I'm trying to solve problems before they even arise. And I think sometimes that can get you in these weird places within your head. So that's been my greatest challenge, is doing that and trusting myself and not getting in too much in my head about things, I think.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. Yeah. So if there's a student out there somewhere who wants to become you, what tips do you have for that person to achieve your level of success or beyond?
Well, I think, and I'm not trying to make a cop-out thing, but this is based on my experience. The most valuable thing for me has been to dive in, no matter what your fears or reservations are. And I think that's because when we look at something like production or engineering too, it's such a vast knowledge pit. And I think when you look at it from the outside and you see these people making these incredible epic albums and you're like, okay, I want to do that. I know I do, but I don't even know where to start to get to that place. I think we need to remember that this is a marathon and that it's a constant learning experience. Like I've told myself the day that I stop learning or refuse to learn anymore is the day that I should move on to something else, because I'm constantly learning, whether it's the technology changing or whether it's the demands of an artist that are forcing me into a place that I've never been to before. And it's in all of these collective experiences of working on multiple projects and with different people. Like I also, when I'm not the one producing in the room, if I'm in the room with another producer or engineer, I'm always watching what they're doing, because they do things, everyone does their things so differently. And so I think it's important to stay open and just start to do it. Like when I started to produce my own stuff in my bedroom, it sounded like shit. And I knew it sounded like shit. But I knew that I wanted to learn how to do it in a way where I could listen back to something and not cringe. And so that was kind of the motivating factor, is just to dive in and try it. And I think that that's a thing that a lot of us kind of tend to do, is when we're scared of something because we don't want it to fail, we kind of prevent ourselves from taking that risk and taking that leap. But I don't think this is the type of of a profession where you can do that. You know, it is all based on that trial and error. So whether you're self-taught or whether you go to engineers or producer school, there's always going to be this step process. And I think you need to establish the knowledge, the foundation of the knowledge first. And you need to understand the basic principles of what audio is. And once you do that, then you're able to start building off of those things. And then once you're comfortable with those things, that's, I think, where the real fun starts, because then you start to find what your signature and your identity is within that. And so it's a journey. And I think you need to be okay with that journey and be willing to take those leaps and be okay with not knowing. But I think that also translates to being a human. Like in my 20s, I thought I knew everything. And then I entered my 30s and I was like, wow, I know nothing. And I'm finally okay with that.
It's hard. It's hard to accept that.
Yes, because I think we live in a world where we're expected to have everything figured out like the minute we leave school.
Yeah.
But I think that what we discover, whether you go to school or not, there is the school of life. And I think it's very freeing when you surrender to the harsh fact that you don't know anything and nothing is set in stone, and once you accept that, I think it takes the pressure off, and then you're okay with exploring, you're okay with trying new things, you know. And of course, that's not to say it's easy. It's like everything's hard because you're battling with your ego, you're battling with your own self-critic, you're battling with whatever your perceptions are of what society expects of you. There's like so many layers to this experience, but I think being open and just diving in is the only thing we can do to continue living and experiencing.
Yeah. So I talk a lot about work-life balance, which some people do better than others. So what do you do to balance your work life? Because it sounds like you work a lot. So how do you kind of shut down a little bit and get that balance in your life?
I mean, I go through phases of being really good at it, and then I go through things of like periods like now where I just have way too much going on, and then I have to really be conscious about creating that space. But I think for me, one of the biggest balancers is having a time to shut off. I do really think it's important to eat and sleep and do all those things. I'm really bad at sleeping because my brain just like is really active at night, but I try to at least not work in that time period. I do have a garden in my backyard, and so a big part of me kind of getting up and out of this room and like out into the air is my responsibility to my garden and all the living things out there. And I do find that that's a very grounding experience too, that kind of pulls me out of that work brain and brings me into the moment. Finding things to bring me into the moment is really important. And the last thing is also I realized, especially during the pandemic, that I needed to find outlets for creativity outside of my work, because my work has expectation attached to it now, right? It's not that naive way of creating when I first started where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, I'm not thinking about it. I'm just doing it. Now there's an expectation attached that I deliver. So I've made a conscious effort to do creative things that have no expectation attached to them, because I find that is what allows me to continue creating, right? It kind of fills the well up. So I do that through cooking, or I started knitting and crocheting avidly the last few years. And so I find that like very cathartic as well.
And you have to focus on counting and all that stuff, right? You can't really let your brain go crazy.
I find it very meditative, like, because once you get into the rhythm of it, it just becomes this thing. And once you get comfortable with something too, like I find that you're able to then go outside of the fundamentals, those foundations that I was talking about earlier, and just really find your way to find your expression and your voice through that. So I'm constantly searching for those outlets.
I swim and it's the consistency is I'm counting strokes, counting laps, and it's just, I can't think about the problem I just left in my office. It's, I have to focus.
That's meditation. Like a lot of people think meditation is sitting cross-legged with a bunch of like drones happening around you. And for me, the most powerful meditations, especially since I find that silence is too much for me right now. Like my brain just doesn't know where to shut off. So I think finding any activity, whether it's walking or swimming or, planting seeds in your garden. For me, it's mowing the lawn. Like I just moved to a lot where I now have to do lawn work, and my lawn days are my happiest days.
So do you go straight lines, make sure everything's...
I do. I like to make the straight line patterns. I just love it. And then I really love taking my edger and then doing all the trimming. And it's just, I find that it's very gratifying at the very end of the whole process. I like to just sit there and observe the yard. And it's funny, like I've even started getting in tune with all the animals and the politics between all those communities in my yard. Like I know all the blue jays, and they're like always bullying the poor robins. I feel so bad for them, and then the little red squirrels. We have these adorable red squirrels, but they're so mean, and they attack all the big gray squirrels. And we just see the same one, and it's always yelling and chasing the other squirrels. And it's interesting. It's like that. It seems so insane, but sitting there and observing these little natural events that are occurring around me and being aware of them brings me a lot of peace and comfort and happiness, so
no, I get that.
Finding moments of that outside of your office space, I think, is important.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. And I ask everybody. So and it's a multi question. I'm going to come to Canada. I've never been to Canada. I'm going to come visit you. So, and I don't make decisions if I'm not working. So you have to do this. So I'm going to come see you. Where are we going to go eat? What kind of food are we going to be eating? What are we going to be drinking? What music are we going to be listening to? And what are we going to talk about?
Okay. First of all, I cannot do small talk, so we're probably going to talk about the universe and existential things, which is my favorite thing to do.
I'm not
and obviously, I want to get to know more about your life and stuff. It's going to be awesome. One of my favorite experiences in Toronto to take people to is this restaurant called Actinolite, and it's a tasting menu restaurant.
Oh, nice.
And the chef is so sweet, and his whole family pretty much works there, and it's been the same staff that's been working there since I started going to this place. And it's going to be pretty much most of the night is going to be spent there because it's like 10 courses of awesomeness. Nice. And every time they come to the table, there is a story behind each plate, and they tell you where it came from. And everything's pretty much sourced locally within like 100 kilometers of the city. Or they also have their own gardens, so they're making things, and it's seasonal eating too, which is funny. Yeah. Like I had a mind-bending moment the first time I went there because I went there in the winter, and I try to eat as seasonally as possible, but it was funny. Like my idea of winter seasonal eating is just root vegetables and meat. Yeah. It's just like very bland. But they were preserving things from all throughout the year, and they were bringing them onto these plates. And so it kind of expanded my mind. And it was like so fun, the seasonal aspect of it. So I would take you there.
Okay.
We would have amazing wine that's paired with each food that's coming to the table. And then we would take a walk just down the street, and I would take you to my favorite mixology bar. And the reason why it's my favorite one, it's called Civil Liberties, is that it's not as pretentious as most mixology bars. Like you walk in and everyone kind of looks like a lumberjack, and there's no menu there, which is really awesome. You just tell them what you feel like, and they'll make it. And even if you don't have a specific cocktail in mind, I'll say I stuck with tequila that night. I'll be like, okay, I'm feeling like something tequila based. And then they'll come up with this gorgeous cocktail.
Oh, beautiful.
You're like, wow, that's amazing. And we don't need to have a lot of cocktails because they're very strong then. So I'm usually good with one or two, and then we're done. Okay. And then it's so hard because the place I would have taken you to just closed during the pandemic. There was this really awesome spot in Toronto that I loved called the Orbit Room. And they usually have a house band, every night of the week that's there weekly. But it's all the most badass session players out of Toronto, that play with everybody. So, there's like a soul kind of Motown feeling night on Saturdays, or there's like the reggae nights that were on either Tuesdays or Thursdays. I can't remember now, but that would be the place where I take you because there's dancing. It's all like industry and musicians and just people dancing, having a good time. But now I don't know where I would take you. I'd have to think about that.
We'll have to find someplace new, or maybe by the
we
time
have to find a new spot.
Maybe by the time I get to Canada, it'll be reopened.
I hope so. Yeah. Did I answer all of them?
You did, because we're not doing small talk, which is just fine with me. No, we're not. So, okay.
Amazing.
Well, that's it. Thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun, and it's been great to get to know you more.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
and I look forward to you coming to visit me in Toronto.
Yeah, and if you're in LA or California, we'll get together here.
I'm sure I'll be there very soon again. I can't wait. It's been a while.
Okay. Well, thanks again.